1980, Central England, an abandoned Victorian house. Walls crumble, floors rot, and ceilings collapse. Not over years, but weeks. Here, a building is inexplicably falling apart, as is the fabric of reality itself. The occupants have fled, forced out by mysterious accidents, unexplained noises, terrifying apparitions, and objects that unaccountably move by themselves. But this is no haunted house. Here, events from the past, the future, and alternative versions of the present are merging as one. Can it be stopped, or even contained? What if it can't? This is no supernatural or science fiction tale. Attested to by dozens of witnesses, unfortunately, this story is true. Taken from my book, The Green Stone, this is the story of how it all began. Just the year before, in the summer of 1979, this same building, number 19 Oaks Crescent, in the town of Wolverhampton, had been the busy headquarters of the paranormal research group, Parasearch, and the offices of its monthly magazine, Strange Phenomena. At the time, I had been the magazine's editor, and the group's chief investigator was Andrew Collins. It started with a routine investigation we were conducting into a 16th century secret society thought to have been founded by the Elizabethan occultist and astrologer Dr. John Dee. Inspired by a new star, actually a supernova, which appeared in the constellation of Cygnus the Swan in 1572, and interpreted to herald a new age of enlightenment, the society, known as the Order of Meonia, met here at Canons Ashby House in the Midlands of Central England. This room, only recently rediscovered, was its clandestine meeting chamber. Upon its walls are the heraldic crests of those who gathered here in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. Unusually for the period of the Reformation, they include important figures from both sides of the religious divide, such as the Protestant statesman and explorer Sir Walter Raleigh and the Catholic activist Robert Catesby. Legend held that the order possessed a sacred green gemstone thought to have strange supernatural powers, which once belonged to the deposed monarch Mary Queen of Scots. Following the abortive gunpowder plot to assassinate the new king, James I, in 1605, which had been led by Robert Catesby, the Order of Meonia disbanded, and the stone was supposedly hidden in a secret location by another member of the group, Humphrey Packington, where it had remained for 4 centuries. Packington, however, was said to have left clues to lead to the stone's whereabouts, hidden somewhere in his home at Harvington Hall, near the Midland town of Kidderminster. Andrew and I decided to visit this old Tudor house to see what we could discover. It was then that events took a strange turn. No one else knew of our investigation, but others in the Parasearch team began to experience what can only be described as psychic impressions. Psychical researcher Terry Shotton was interviewed in 1981.
During the many years of research, one of the people we'd investigated, and who proved to be a very good psychic, was a lady by the name of Miss Penny Blackwell. One evening I got a phone call from Penny asking if I would go down to see her as soon as possible. I got down to Penny's about an hour later, and she took out a tape and explained that for the very first time she'd decided to tape herself in a trance. She played the tape, and on the tape she first of all starts to talk in quite a normal voice. Suddenly her voice changes and it starts to talk about parasearch, the people involved with parasearch, and a project that we were about to embark on, and that it would have quite major repercussions in the future. This was quite strange to me because I hadn't got a clue what on earth she was talking about. It just seemed to be absolutely ridiculous. I gave no more thought to it directly until the following day. I then got a phone call from Alan.
Alan Beard was a family friend of the Shottons who knew absolutely nothing about our investigation into a lost green stone. He too was interviewed about this phone call in 1981.
And while I was speaking to him, quite unexpectedly, I had the impression, a vision if you like, of a white object floating through space towards me. It kept on coming towards me and shrank again in size. This was something strange because I've never had anything like this happen to me before, images or impressions. It came totally out of the blue. The final impression I had of it was that it was coming towards me, shrinking in size. The smallest it was when it stopped in front of me, and it was the size and impression of a green stone mounted on an old silver ring.
Andrew and I were astonished to hear of Alan Beard's vision. Was it a remarkable coincidence? Some kind of telepathy? Or was the legend true? That a sacred green stone really did await discovery? Andrew and I decided to visit Harvington Hall, the place where it was said the clues to lead to the whereabouts of the green stone had been hidden. When we arrived, we were in for yet another surprise. We discovered that during recent renovations to the building, a mysterious mural was found on the wall of an upstairs corridor. It had been painted during Humphrey Packington's time and deliberately sealed up behind wood panelling since the early 1600s. Known as the Nine Worthies, as it depicted 9 heroic characters from history and legend, might this old wall mural hold the clues said to lead to the whereabouts of the stone? We examined the painting, ultimately concluding that the central image was of crucial importance. It depicted a youthful King Arthur wielding Excalibur, and behind him his knights were gathered on a hill. Remarkably, this seemed to relate to a location in the surrounding landscape. Nearby there was a hill called Knight's Hill, and below it there were 2 lakes connected by a stream over which there was an old footbridge dating from Packington's time. It was known locally as Arthur's Bridge. But even as Andrew and I prepared to visit the site, again having told no one of our latest findings, someone else known to the Parasearch team experienced a strange lucid dream she felt compelled to phone and tell us about. Marion Sunderland was interviewed in 1981.
I had a psychic impression myself, and I could see water, what appeared to be a very still lake.
But Marion was not the only one to call the Parasearch office, having no idea what we were doing. Alan Beard.
I decided that I would sit down with a writing pad and a pen in the dining room at home to see if I could get any more impressions of where we might look to find this green stone. No impressions came, but I did hear somebody, a voice perhaps, try to dictate something behind my head. It was as if I was listening to snatches of a conversation. The snatches that I heard gave reference to a holly bush, But the more important thing was that we weren't looking for a stone, we were looking for a sword that would lead us to the stone.
Marion had had no idea we were about to visit a lake, and Alan had no idea our search involved a sword. The sword wielded by Arthur in the Nine Worthies mural. Andrew and I recently returned to the site to recall the eventful day of 40 years ago.
So we came here almost immediately. We knew anything about the site. And we hadn't told anybody. We hadn't told Alan Beard, or hadn't told Terry Shotton, or anybody. We hadn't told Marion.
But just before we set off, of course, as you mentioned, Alan Beard said you're actually looking for a sword at this point.
And that the sword would lead us to the stone.
Astonishingly, Marion had also seen a sword in her dream and was convinced she knew where it was.
I saw a large slab of stone. Resting on the slab of stone was a sword. And with that, I got an intense, overwhelming smell of rotting, decaying vegetation. It was very unpleasant.
So now we're even more certain that there's a link with King Arthur's Excalibur. What Alan Beard also said was that he keeps seeing a holly bush. And as we will see when we go round to the bridge, there is a holly bush right next to it, and I presume it's still there today. It was very big. That's where we went back to, and that's where we're going to go now.
The holly bush we discovered is no longer there, but it was captured on film taken in 1979. In the actual picture of King Arthur wielding Excalibur in the Nine Worthies paintings, he is actually standing, as you look at him, he's looking down and to his left. And if you stood on the bridge and looked down onto the left, that's where you'd end up. And the knights on the hill gathered behind him are to his left, and that's Knight's Hill.
Yeah. And we then focused our attention on the other side of the bridge facing out onto the lake. The stone blocks that you see here, nicely stacked. There was something similar on the other side that was absolutely perfect. It was actually higher than this.
Since 1979, because of the publicity later surrounding our search, treasure hunters have virtually demolished the other side of the bridge. But behind which stone were we to look? Ultimately settled on 9 stones along, 9 down.
That's it.
Because 9 was alluded to
Had
in
been
Nine
the prominent
Worthies.
number associated with the Nine Worthies. It had also been suggested.
For the first time in years, Andrew makes his way down to the overgrown location we'd decided to search.
Maybe it's behind the 9th stone along and down from the bridge. So 9 stones along and 9 stones down. And we eventually got down to the 9th layer and the 9th stone along from the bridge. And when we removed that stone, which would be impossible to remove and covered with brambles beforehand, we saw an alcove, a small recess area.
Behind the stone.
And the torch, as it was shone inside, we could see that there was something long and thin inside it. And we didn't dare think at that moment as to what it was, but already the excitement was rising because it was quite clear that this was the blade of a sword. And that's exactly what we were told we'd find. A sword that would lead us to the green stone.
Not only had we solved a 400-year-old cryptic message, incredibly, Marion had said we would find a sword on a stone slab where there was a bad smell of rotting vegetation. She was right on both counts, and Alan Beard had told us a holly bush stood nearby. The holly bush was directly above us. Lying on top of the stone slab in the concealed alcove was a short sword or long dagger. Heavily encrusted with years of sediment, the item was around 20 inches long with a 2-inch crossguard. It was examined by experts at the Grosvenor Museum in the city of Chester and found to have been made from a single casting of steel. Identified as a dirk, a 16th century short ornamental Scottish sword, its crossguard was embossed with the personal monogram of the very person who was said to have once possessed the green stone, Mary Queen of Scots. Having been found on his estate, the sword was taken to the Earl of Coventry, who later gave it to the nearby Tudor House Museum in the town of Upton upon Severn, where it is now on public display. By an astonishing coincidence, in 1593, the museum building had been the home of Dr. John Dee, when he had been a clergyman working at the church right across the street. John Dee was believed to have been the man who founded the Order of Meonia, the very people who seem to have hidden the sword. Any doubt that the sword had indeed belonged to this secret society was dispelled by an inscription along its blade, 3 words in Elizabethan spelling: Meonia for Mary. Ultimately, the sword did lead us to find the stone, just as Alan Beard had said. It is a long story, too long to be told here, but the clues concerned a second star that appeared in the constellation of Cygnus the Swan in the year 1600. Recorded at the time by the astronomer Johann Kepler, it was in fact the rare brightening of an existing star not previously visible with the naked eye, and it appeared in the Swan's neck. Near the bridge where the sword was found, there was a meander in the River Avon called the Swan's Neck, and it was here, from a grassy mound, that a brass casket was unearthed. The Grosvenor Museum dated it to the mid to late 16th century, and inside was a small green stone, fashioned from simple jade. We no longer have the casket and stone, but this rare footage was taken shortly after the discovery. We were all amazed by what we'd discovered, but none more so than Alan Beard.
The first time I saw the green stone was on the evening it was found. And I couldn't believe it, that there it was, the same small green stone that I had seen in a psychic vision weeks before.
As astonishing as it had all been, no one was prepared for what followed once the stone was taken to the Parasearch office. It began with strange electrical anomalies. In 1981, I recalled how it started.
The light bulbs were blowing far more frequently than we should be expecting. We investigated that and we couldn't seem to find anything to account for it. Then we started to receive electric shocks from the various appliances in the house. So, thinking that there was some major fault in the wiring system, we called in the local electricity board, who investigated, and they were quite baffled because they said that in their opinion something was drawing electricity off this wiring system of the Oaks Crescent headquarters.
Then it got stranger. Each evening, just as it got dark, a thick grey smoke filled the entire building, even in closets and behind closed doors. It cleared after a few minutes, and no sign of a fire or burning could be discovered. Unbelievably, it occurred each day around the same time. The whole place was repeatedly searched, but no explanation could be found. The electric company was again called in to check the wiring, but found nothing amiss. Not only the parasearch team, but visitors to the office witnessed the weird anomalies, attracting the interest of local TV news, who came to film the events and interview staff. Nearly all had experienced appliances fusing, lights dimming, or had received inexplicable electric shocks, and the bizarre smoke continued to appear. Everyone was mystified. It all became too much when Andrew Collins slept over at the office after working late. He awoke in the middle of the night to find flames leaping from his sleeping bag. No explanation for the fire could be found, but he'd had a lucky escape. After that, no one wanted to work at the Parasearch headquarters. In fact, all work ceased and the building was abandoned after the electricity in the place failed altogether, leaving engineers baffled. Martin Keatsman, a student at the time working with the magazine, was the first to witness a frightening new level of unexplained phenomena when he was helping to clear the building. He was interviewed a couple of years later.
I was alone in the front room of the headquarters and he was out back somewhere when something rather strange happened. My attention was suddenly drawn, that's the only word I can think of to use, to the mantelpiece above the fireplace, and in the middle a radio belonging to Andy Collins, which quite inexplicably and to me absolutely amazingly suddenly lifted into the air to crash down onto the record player and smash the lid irreparably.
This was just the first of such disturbing events. Removal men were dumbstruck on seeing office furniture moving around. Others witnessed doors opening and slamming shut. Some members of the Parasearch team even refused to re-enter the place, having items thrown at them, as if by unseen hands. Most of us, however, were excited at the prospect of having what seemed to be a poltergeist case occurring so close to home. With a year remaining on the lease, we continued to visit the empty house, sometimes staying overnight. With the power out, the rambling old building was illuminated only by flashlights and candles. Strange noises were heard. Banging sounds, whispering voices, eerie distant singing. And inexplicable things were seen, crimson balls of light and a luminous floating mist. A coin on the floor suddenly became red hot and melted into the carpet. And on one occasion, a blue, gelatinous substance began oozing from the walls. Ultimately, the apparitions appeared. A ghostly dark figure in Victorian clothes, a woman in contemporary attire, and, most astonishing of all, what, for all the world, looked like an ancient Egyptian princess. Over a period of just a few months, the house began to collapse from within. Plaster fell from the walls, the floors began to rot, pipes rusted and burst. It was almost as if time inside the building was passing at an accelerated rate. What was causing all this? We reasoned that perhaps the various paranormal experiments that we'd conducted here had somehow initiated these bizarre events. Eventually, Marion Sunderland had what she described as a psychic impression, revealing that the activity had been caused by the green stone. Although it was no longer in the building, it had, she said, opened some kind of preternatural rift. And if something wasn't done, the phenomena would spread beyond the confines of the Oaks Crescent house. But she knew how it could be stopped.
I felt somehow that the stone was perhaps responsible for attracting or causing some of the incredible phenomena that had taken place, some of the disturbances. Also, at this time, I had a strong impression that if we could somehow discharge the power of the stone, or at least neutralize it for the time being, that this would help matters quite considerably. I thought and felt very deeply that the stone itself should be taken to venerated ground.
We took the stone to a ruined monastic building near Wolverhampton, White Ladies Priory, where some of the team believed the relic had been made.
When we got there, we took the stone to what we discovered was an ancient burial mound lying about 50 yards from the priory, surrounded by trees. I felt that there was something very powerful going to take place at 9:30. And under the circumstances, I thought it would be much the best thing to retreat to the safety of the priory, to wait, and to see what took place.
The 9 of us who were present that evening left the wood and retreated to within the walls of the priory, as Marion suggested. Even after all we'd already witnessed, no one was prepared for what followed, once it grew dark. One of those present was local horticultural officer Mike Ratcliffe. He was interviewed in 1981.
Once we're within the grounds of the priory and actually inside the walls, there came the most eerie screeches from the woodland area where the stone had been placed. These are certainly not made by anything in the natural world that I know of. Certainly no birds or animals ever made noises like those. And then after a short period of time, in the sky, again in the area of the woodland where the stone had been placed, there came sort of 5 brilliant flashes. And these came in fairly quick succession, but spread over an area, as I say, in the sort of the woodland area, and they were certainly brighter than anything that I have seen sort of man-made, so to speak. Really sort of brilliant. They lit up the whole of the area around about.
5 spheres of brilliant white light floated silently in the air before merging as one, moving towards us and exploding with a blinding flash and an ear-shattering bang.
When these lights exploded and the light from the balls of light lit up all the surrounding areas, we all started to make a dash back for the cars. I kept looking, as we ran across back to the cars, I kept looking back towards the trees to see whether I could see anything that could have possibly have been the cause, but it was nothing. It was just all blackness, as if nothing had occurred. We got back into the cars. I was quite shaken. I think everyone else was. And we just got away from the place as quickly as possible.
There is much more to this story, told not only in The Green Stone, but in Andrew Collins' book, The Seventh Sword, published in 1991. The Wolverhampton building remained abandoned for years before being sold and converted into apartments. As far as I know, it is now a quiet, ordinary house. What I've covered might seem far-fetched, but if anything, I have played down the astonishing events that occurred 40 years ago, as you will discover if you read this special 40th anniversary edition of The Green Stone.